number 5 for now. I'm going to talk about induction, so we haven't really covered that quite yet, although you could have done the other parts fine, or looked up induction. So hold on to that and add an example of induction based on what you learned today, or maybe you've done it already, but hold on to that for now. I've only assigned part 1. I'll assign part 2 of number 5 later. So I have not assigned part 2 yet. So we'll turn that in next time. Homework number 4 I'm adding to that, and homework number 5B I'm adding to it. That's 5B, not part 2 of homework number 5. So homework 5B is listed separately at the titanium site. All right, so last time we talked about deduction, 2 principles of deduction. One of the principles was transitivity of said implication. So if premise 1 is true and premise 2 is true, you can use deduction to reach a conclusion. Deduction has a property that the rules of logic guarantee. And I shouldn't have to say this, that if the deduction is logical, because if it isn't logical, it's not deduction. Now people misuse the word deduction. So you have to pay attention to how the media misuses the word deduction and use it the way we do at universities or in math departments rather than on television. On television, Mr. Spock, that's the one with the ears on Star Trek, not Dr. Spock. That's the one that writes the child care books. Mr. Spock says, "Captain, it's elementary deduction. The Romulans wouldn't attack us." That's not deduction. Sherlock Holmes says, Watson says, "How did you know who the criminal was?" Elementary deduction, my dear Watson. That's not deduction. He's making inferences. It's called inference, what they're doing, drawing a conclusion from ideas that may be compatible with it. The deduction always follows the rules of logic, and if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. If the conclusion is false, we know that something that both premises can't be true. Cannot be the case that both premises are true. So that's deduction. The example of a deductive principle that I gave was, well, we had 2 examples of logical principles. One was if A implies B and B implies C, I'll add on here and, so A implies B and B implies C, that means we can draw the conclusion that A implies C. Where all A's are B, and if all B's are C, then all A's are C. This one's called transitivity. And the other one is the definition of if-then, which is that if A implies B is the same as, is true if and only if not B implies not A. Or another way of writing it is if all A's are B, that means that all not B's are not A. And this is an idea that tells us that if the conclusion is false, it can't be the case that both premises are true, because this has the property that if the premises are true, then the conclusion follows. So if that's the case, if A then B, then if not B, this is the conclusion, then not A. And what is A? That both premises are true. So these are the 2 principles of logic that we've had in here, and that we'll need and that we use to do this kind of problem. And this problem allows us to translate sentences into, and what is operationism? Operationism is the position in philosophy or in science that the meaning of an empirical statement is equivalent to the operationally specifiable tests. So in other words, the meaning is equivalent to the method of checking it. If you don't know how to check a statement, then you don't know what it means. How do you test it? It tells you if you understand what it means. What does it mean? translate into how would I test it? If I say there's a $100 bill under here, what does it mean? Lots of ways to test it, all those different ways of testing it. $1,000 bill. $1,000 bill. How would you find out if it's true or not? You could ask people to look. Kyle, take a look. Do you see at least $1,000 bill in there?
I do indeed.
Does that make it true? Because he might be working for me, right? He might be playing along. Lee, would you like to look? Do you see at least one in there?
It looks like it.
Looks like it. Does that make it true?
No.
No? Who said that? Okay, pile on. What do you think? You see at least one in there?
Actually, yes.
Actually, yes. That's not convincing. You guys believe it now? We could have set this up ahead of time. Who knows? You never know what to believe. You know, there's a lot of propositions. You have to know to be skeptical, but you also want to be open-minded. When you hear a claim, people are making claims all the time, making statements about ideas, and we're going to be confronting some of them already today. A couple of them in the examples here, and we'll talk about more. When people make a claim, I want you to be skeptical and open-minded. Now, skeptical, what does that mean? What's the opposite of skeptical? Gullible. Yeah, so I want you to be skeptical, not gullible. But I want you also to be open-minded. What does open-minded mean, as opposed to closed-minded? Open-minded means you'll consider the evidence and the arguments. You're willing to listen to it and think about it. Look at the evidence, consider it, think about it. Now sometimes people think that the skeptic says, oh, I don't believe anything, I don't care what you say, I'm not going to believe it, my mind is made up. But no, I want you to be skeptical, so you could be skeptical and closed-minded. That kind of, I don't want you to be like that. That just means you won't believe anything. A lot of people are skeptical and closed-minded. Once somebody tells them something, they believe it forever. These people become terrorists or who knows what, join their political parties. You know, a lot of ideas people have about sex, they hear it from a 12-year-old, that's it. Once I've heard it from a 12-year-old, 12-year-olds must know everything about it there is to know about that. Now there's gullible, closed-minded people. Those are the ones not even skeptical about it. Whatever somebody says, they believe it and then they hold on to it forever. Gullible and open-minded, well, there's a lot of people want to do business with you if you're like that, I guess, right? You know, somebody says, I've got some land I'd like to sell to you. You say, well, yeah, is it worth it? They say, oh, yeah, I'm going to sell it to you for $10,000, but it's really worth $1 million. Well, how come you're selling it? Oh, because I'm trying to do you a favor. I'm such a nice guy. I know you need the money. Oh, well, you're so nice. I mean, that's a good reason. Because after all, I deserve it. Yes, you do. You deserve to have a $1 million property for $10,000. You buy it. You say, oh, I just found out that your property's not worth anything anymore. They decided to build the Keystone pipeline on it. There's going to be a big oil pipe running across it. The government's going to take it from you and give it to an oil company so they can sell oil to China and make a lot of money. Oh, okay. But I'll buy it back from you for $1,000. Why would you give me $1,000 if it's worthless? Because I'm trying to do you a favor. I felt bad about selling it to you for $1 million and for $10,000. Oh, okay, sell it to them for $1,000. They just made $9,000 off you, right? And they come and they tell you, now it's valuable again. Because now the oil company is going to give you some rights or something. So it'll be worth $1 million. Buy it back for $10,000. Okay, you buy it back. Oh, now the oil company decided they're not going to give you money after all. But I'll give you $1,000 for it back. Oh, okay. People want to do business with you if you're like that. A lot of people got other people to sign a lot of papers. They lost their homes. A lot of students are in debt right now. They've got to give half of everything they own to the banks for the rest of their lives. They're stuck that way. We used to have something called indentured servants. It was made illegal. It's called usury. Now there's $1 trillion worth of debt out there being held by former students that graduated looking for work, and they owe the rest of their life half everything they earned to the banks. Maybe the government will step in and pay it off, because when they default, when these people get sick or have medical problems and can't pay it back, the banks will say, oh, now we're in trouble, we need money, and the taxpayers will pay for it, right? But I'd like for you to be skeptical and open-minded. Skeptical means you don't believe it just because somebody says so, and open-minded means you'll consider the evidence. What's the evidence? Well, before you can get the evidence, you need to know what would be the evidence. And the idea of operationism says what you need to do is collect data and check it out. Here's a statement, here are two statements. We need to apply a logical rule to figure out what do we have to do to check them. So, everyone who was not vaccinated got sick. So which cases do we need to check? We need to check the ones that were not vaccinated, because if they got sick, that agrees with the idea, with the statement, right? But if they didn't get sick, if they're well, that's no good. That would disprove it. Everybody agree? We need to check the people who are unvaccinated. And we need to check the people who are not sick. The ones who are well. Now, this is counterintuitive, isn't it? Because you don't think about, oh, well, we need to go, all the people that went to Disneyland and didn't get sick, we need to track them down. The papers aren't checking those people. They're not reporting anything about that in the paper, but that's highly relevant to this question. So they're not checking it at all right now. Well, why? You have to check the people who are well, because all A's are B is the same as all not B or not A. So we need to check the A's to make sure they're B. So we need to check the ones who are not vaccinated to make sure they got sick. And we need to check the ones that aren't sick to make sure they were vaccinated. Right? So we need to check the not B's. So the well people, suppose there's a well person who's okay, a well person who is vaccinated. Is that okay? Doesn't say that the well people were or weren't vaccinated, right? But suppose there's a well person who is not vaccinated. That's no good. So the two that you needed to check, so the answer was you needed to check the well and the not vaccinated. How many got that right? Okay, well, it's more than last time. We had the to be or not to be. There was nobody got it right. Typical class of about 100, you get about 1 or 2 the first day. All right, so how about this one? Everybody who got sick had been vaccinated. So now, to check this one, we need to check the sick and the ones who were not vaccinated. So let's check that statement. So this is the analysis of the first proposition. The second proposition, these are two different statements. Don't confuse them with each other. And don't get confused away from listening to it in the news. All right, everybody who got sick had been vaccinated. Oh, I said had been vaccinated. I meant to say had not been vaccinated. Oh well. We'll do it this way. Everybody who got sick had been vaccinated. Boy, that's like an odd one. That's an odd one for the measles case, because that's not realistic. But we'll check that out. So everybody who got sick, so we want to make sure that the sick people had been vaccinated. So we need to check the sick to make sure they're vaccinated. That's okay. If they were not vaccinated, that's no good. So we need to check the sick people, and we need to check the not vaccinated to make sure they were not sick. So we need to check over here the unvaccinated to make sure that they were not sick. So we need to check this one, the sick, and the unvaccinated. All right, everybody clear on that? I meant to say unvaccinated. Now they are reporting in the paper and in the magazines that most of the people who are getting the measles had not been vaccinated. What if it was the case that most of the people who were getting sick at Disneyland had been vaccinated? Does that sound bad for the vaccine? It is not. What if an equal number had been vaccinated or not vaccinated? Does it sound like the vaccine isn't doing anything? It sounds that way. That's why you shouldn't report it that way. How many are in journalism were in here? Anybody in journalism? You sat up for a second. I thought you were going to say I'm in journalism. Brownie made him do it, I guess. I don't know. Brownie said, sit up like you're in journalism, but no. All right. So, I'll show you why that's the case. Let's just look at some numbers here. Suppose the numbers are like this. Here's all the people that were exposed. Say we're talking about the 1,000 people that just got exposed by the woman that went to Disneyland, unvaccinated, acquired the measles. They say about 90%. In a situation like this, if anybody here not been vaccinated against the measles, it can be deadly at your age. You better be vaccinated. Even if you're exposed, vaccination can still actually prevent it if you get the vaccine right away. If you get exposed, if you go over and you haven't been vaccinated, and you see somebody with all the spots, immediately go get vaccinated. It's like rabies. You can actually be vaccinated after you've been exposed, and the vaccine can protect you. All right, suppose it's like this. Suppose it's the case that of the 1,000 people, 950 people who were vaccinated, 50 out of 1,000 people had been vaccinated, 50 of them got sick. That's 5% of the people that had been vaccinated. 50 out of 1,000, so this 950 plus 50 adds up to 1,000 that had been vaccinated. These are the people not vaccinated. Suppose that there are 50 people not vaccinated and they all got sick. Everybody who is not vaccinated, so the rate of catching the disease is 100% if you haven't been vaccinated. It's actually about 90%. So if somebody had measles in here right now, you'd expect 90% of the class to acquire the measles if they hadn't been vaccinated. But it could be. But notice, of the people that got sick, half of them, so 100 people got sick in this example. Of the 100 people that got sick, half of them had been vaccinated. So if you reported this number, half the people that got sick had been vaccinated. Sounds like the vaccine isn't doing anything, right? And it could even be that most of the people, suppose there were only 10 people that weren't vaccinated, but all of them got sick. Then it would be the case, most of the people that at Disneyland that got sick, 50 out of 60, out of a total of 60, most of the people had been vaccinated who got sick at Disneyland. So, the right way to look at this, these are two different questions. Everybody who is not vaccinated, everybody who got sick, I meant to write, had been unvaccinated. This is the one that really matters. Everybody who had not been, in this case, everybody who had not been vaccinated got sick. So A is true of this matrix. Everybody who got sick had been unvaccinated is not true of this matrix. All right? So this gives you an idea and also tells you that the percentages, the way they're reporting it in the press, even though it's not working out like this, it's working out right now. Most of the people that are getting it, they're reporting in the paper, which makes it sound good for the vaccines. But the way they've chosen to phrase the question could be misleading to people, and the press doesn't even know it. And they may end up, it may at some point happen that they'll be saying, oh, most of the people getting sick this time have been vaccinated. So don't bother getting vaccinated because it isn't helping. All right, so you better play with this. If you don't understand this right away, good idea to play with these numbers and help get yourself straight about thinking about all A's are B, all B's are A. Two different ideas. And some of them are more relevant than others for actually the question that really counts. Now, what type of statement is this? All rectangles have a right angle. Last time I defined a rectangle as a quadrilateral with 4 right angles. So this is a logical statement. It is true a priori, once you know the definition of a rectangle, that a rectangle has right angles in it, so you know that all rectangles have a right angle. How many got that? Most people now are getting that right. Okay, so that's a logical statement, and logical, in this case, a priori true. If I said some rectangles have an angle that is an acute angle, less than 90 degrees, you'd know that's a priori false. You could disprove that logical statement also. Kids who get vaccinated have a higher risk of autism. That statement is an empirical statement, and it turns out it's a posteriori false. Now, people are telling you that that is true based on evidence. They are lying to you. Nobody who's actually looked at the question has made this claim. Nobody is claiming this. There are websites claiming it, advocate groups for autistic kids. And there's a big fight within the autistic community among different groups of people on different subjects. So the autism community is broken up into warring factions. And there is a faction. One faction is being the main spokesperson is an actress and former Playboy model, Jenny McCarthy. She's a great expert on autism, according to some people. She has an autistic kid. Her argument goes like this. Child was born, looked okay, got inoculated, and got autism. That shows the inoculation must have done it. What else could have done it? What else could it have been? Genetic. Could it have been a virus? No. Could it have been anything else? Could it have been genetic? No. Could it have been a hormonal problem? Could it be a change in the brain due to something else? Could it be anything else? No, it must have been the inoculation. So if you actually look at the data this way, and there are dozens of studies have been conducted to look at the associates. Is there any connection or any association between autism and vaccination? And the answer is no study has reported such a thing. People made it up. And they got a lot of parents worried about it. But when you watch television, so have you been watching television since the Disneyland thing happened with the mumps, measles, rubella issue? Nobody's been watching television. Anybody been watching television? I heard some people saying no, they don't watch television.
No.
But anybody watch the news and how they've been covering the Disneyland measles epidemic? Nobody. All right. Well, so if you don't watch the news, then you can just learn how to watch the news in the future. On the news, they're giving equal time to somebody who said, no, I looked into the subject and I considered the dangers of vaccines and made the decision not to inoculate my child. And then they have a doctor who's on there who knows the statistics and actually knows the research and knows the science, saying, you're exposing your child to a risk of death or permanent brain damage or complication, and this is preventable with a perfectly safe vaccine. And not only are you putting your own child at risk, your child can give it to other people, and you're putting other people's children at risk. So think about what you're doing. But they gave equal time to the medical professional and to some mother who knows, she went on a website and read what Jenny McCarthy wrote about it. And these websites act like they know what they're talking about. So we want to be skeptical and open-minded. We want to know what is the evidence, how should you look at the evidence, how does it come out when people actually do collect the data, and not just listen to Jenny McCarthy says this, but the doctor says that. But how can we decide? We're just the newspaper. We're just the Channel 2 reporting on this. We have to give equal weight to some mother who read Jenny McCarthy and the doctor who's read the scientific literature. And we have to report it that way, like, oh, there's a controversy. Who knows what's true? All right. Okay, so you've probably heard this before, this claim, because it's being promulgated in the media, even though it's false. They will also tell you, typically in the media, if the doctors say this isn't true. Jenny McCarthy says, oh yeah, that's what they would say, because they're doctors. All right. What type of statements? So hopefully you got that this is an empirical statement, and you may or may not have heard already that it's a posteriori false. So that one I'm less concerned with, and that you recognize it as an empirical statement. But now you know something about the evidence. The evidence is not in agreement with that statement. Okay, who is this horse, and how does his story relate to psychology? So this is in chapter 2 on research methods, the part of the book that's talking about some of the issues we're dealing with in this part of the course.